One thing that I hear a lot from the watershed groups here in the island is they want to try to get rid of silt as much as they can.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard, from the way that you do it, is the rivers need a certain amount of silt to operate.
Right.
Without it, they
Yep.
self-destruct.
So watercourses do two things.
Yep.
They move water and they move sediment. And everything else after that is just the nature of the beast, okay? So it's all related on geomorphic processes. So if a stream's not moving sediment, it's got to get it from somewhere else because it needs to have that sediment to help dissipate its energy. So when you look at digging sediment ponds, for instance, or things that are trying to trap sediment in a system, all you're really doing is you're not really collecting the sediment that's coming off the surface of the land when you dig a sediment pond out.
Yeah.
You're collecting, unless that sediment pond's based on the width to depth ratio of the channel.
Okay.
What you're really doing is collecting sediment off the stream banks and off the stream bed itself.
And not really dealing
And
with
not
the
really
issue.
getting, you may get a little bit coming off the surface, but the idea is that you want to be able to collect, you want to use that sediment to your ability to build designs in the channel, like creating bars or creating
slow
deposition areas, yeah.
Slow
Yeah.
areas that
Because one of the things, when I walk a lot of streams in PEI, I don't see a lot of bar structures.
No.
I don't see a lot of mid-channel bars. I don't really see a lot of point bars. I don't see a lot of lateral bars.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that yourself walking the streams, but
There's on the Valleyfield system. There's a couple bar systems that are there, and it's that fine cobblestone about that big, and it just goes and goes, and then after that it just turns to that very fine mucky silt.
Yeah.
And then.
But that's one thing with the sediment moving down through the system is the streams deposit that to help control their energy.
Yeah.
Throughout, either narrowing the channel by creating a point bar to, all of a sudden, they build a point bar because it's a deposition area, so they found their area to slow down and get rid of the energy, so now they're going to speed it up for the next little section. And that's where you get your pools and your riffles developing. And
okay.
Yeah.
So in a way, a river is somewhat predictable. to an extent.
I wouldn't say predictable, but you can figure out what it's trying to do.
Just based on what you see.
Yeah. Again, when we run through like a geomorphic process, we're trying to identify all the features that are happening, whether it's streams degrading, or it's aggrading or collecting material, or it's trying to widen itself, or it's got a planimetric adjustment. So when you look at it from a bird's eye view, how is it changing across the landform?
Okay.
Those processes tell us how that stream's functioning. Is it a stable system? Is it unstable? And what geomorphic process is driving it to be unstable? Is it because it's getting too much sediment? Is it because it's a lack of sediment? And a lack of sediment is just as bad as having too much sediment, right? Yeah. One of the things that we see a lot are people trying to always get the sediment out of the stream.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a good thing.
No, that was until I started hearing about how you did your processes and your ideas and thoughts on it. I was kind of always under the impression, silt is a bad thing in the river system.
Too much silt is, obviously.
Well, that's kind of what I've ended up. That's kind of where my opinion is now. It's like, yes, too much is bad, but whenever I try to talk to people here in the island and say silt is needed within a system, they look at me crazy.
Yep, that's right.
And I add to that, and I say, yes, too much is not a good thing, but you can't take it all away.
No, that's right.
So.
And that seems to be a lot of the focus, and not only on PEI, but a lot of the watershed groups we work with in New Brunswick as well, and Nova Scotia, is how quickly can we get that sediment out of our system? Where can we get it out of the way? But when you do that, you're taking away from the stream that's trying to function, that needs sediment.
Yeah.
Whether it's building pools or building riffles or building point bars or creating deposition areas.
Yeah.
By pulling that fine sediment out, you're maybe depriving the stream of something it actually needs.
And then it just goes does whatever it wants.
Yeah, because if it needs sediment to help dissipate its energy and it's not getting it, it's going to try to get it off the banks or out of the stream bed. So it's going to start to widen itself out to get it off the banks. And then all of a sudden you move down and go, wow, we got all the sediment downstream, so now we got to start building more structures to take the sediment out. And the stream's really trying to do it itself, because it'll get off the banks, build a point bar, and get its width back to what it needs to be, and create its own floodplains.
Okay.
So, if you keep taking the sediment out, the stream's going to continually get wider and wider
And you'll always you'll always have a perpetual issue with silt.
Yeah, or you get a stream that's too wide, and then it's just shallow and flat, and hardly any gradation to it, right?
And then the worst thing with that is that then your habitat goes extremely downhill fast.
Yeah.
Because your water temp goes up.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it's eating away from the banks. You're shading it. Like it's a snowball effect.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
So when you do stream restoration, there are all these little considerations you have to take into the bigger picture. You know, it's not just I'm gonna do something here, and then that's it. My project's done.
It's done. Yeah. It's
When I do something here, what am I actually doing?
It sounds like you have to do a lot of planning. You have to sort of.
And that's one of the downfalls with most of the funding that organizations get is they don't allow for any planning. There's no fees to allow to come in and survey. They want you to take the money and do something right away with it. And you know, back in the 80s and early 90s, there was a big push on doing that, and DFO's big mandate was digger logs then, which was great because number one, they were easy to install, but it got people out into the watershed to see actually what's happening. But they're a horrendous structure, you know. They fail most of the time because, again, they have to be really, for a digger log to function properly, it has to be put in place the right way.
So now what happens whenever a tree naturally falls in the system?
Yeah.
Then the system will just adjust.
System adapts to it.
So,
And then when you see, like when you walk a system that has a tree falling across it, and you go back maybe 6 or 7 years later, and that tree now is part of the stream bed, and the water's flowing over it nicely. It's got a nice scour pool. That didn't just happen overnight.
No,
that was a process of many, many rain events of that stream adapting to that channel. Because you say these popples fall across there now.
Yeah.
So they're above the surface flow by this much. So we get a bank full rain.
Yeah.
The system comes up. All of a sudden the water's hitting that tree, now it's got to go underneath it. It's not quite enough to get over, but now it's got to go underneath.
It speeds up.
So it creates more energy.
Yeah.
So now you have this extra pressure put on the stream bottom, it starts to scour your pool. So over time those trees start to settle, rot, get down in. So now they're laying in the water, and they're maybe below the surface a little bit. Now they start to collect sediment. So now they start to build a riffle on the back stream side like a digger log would. But they still have the pool here because the water can get over a little bit, but it still has a downfall and it's still scouring underneath, and all of a sudden they just get down enough where they now start to collect sediment totally. Creates a nice sediment spawning area in behind it, and you still have your pool up front.
Huh.
But that's that's not usually an overnight situation. Like, we come in to do a digger log, we do 5 or 6 a day. So we're really trying to make that process that takes, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. We're trying to do it right away. Make it happen. So when you put in a digger log, those are sort of the steps that you have to think of. If I was doing this by nature, how does nature make it happen and make it look real? So if we're going to mimic that, how do we do it? Do we put a log at a certain height and let sediment naturally accumulate behind it over time, or do we actually dig it into the stream bed? Do we V it down to the center? Do we just run it straight across? Do we slope it to one side? What angle do we put it on? They have the standard, 30 degrees to the bank kind of an angle, and that works out in nature really well, but nature builds that over time. So if we're putting one at 30 degrees, how are we going to adapt that to the bank so we don't scour the bank out really quickly?
Yeah, what stage of nature is it that you're setting that up?
Yeah.
What about brush mats?
I'm a big fan of brush mats. One of the things that you have to be worried about brush mats is when you build it, are we narrowing the channel too much? Or are we not narrowing it enough and not making it effective? So again, channel width is very important to understand what your channel width needs to be and what nature's trying to make it.
Yeah.
And again, you figure that out by just, surveying and looking at old aerial photographs.
Yeah.
You go back 30 or 40 years and measure a channel width here off an old aerial photo, come out and measure it, and you say, oh wow, it's still the same width. Nothing's really changed. It's maybe shifted a little bit to the left, to the right, but it actually hasn't changed the width. Or maybe you'll realize, oh, we've lost, we've lost maybe 10 meters. So that'd be a huge change. Well, that's due to, we've had different changing in weather and climate and things like that. So we've got these changes happening. So maybe if we build our brush mat maybe 5 meters this year out from one bank and let it accumulate sediment, see how that works, and then come back in the next year and build it out another 5 meters, then get it back to that same width. That way you're creating your floodplain in a very gradual motion, and your brush mats, you want to slope them down as well, right? You don't want to have them come off the bank and then come down square, right? So, you know, you start with a thin layer and you build yourself up. But again, you never build it above what the existing floodplain is. You know, I mean, over there's the right height. You know, that's what you have over there.
Yeah, that's that nice taper that goes up.
Yeah. So all of those, no matter, I mean, the brush mat sounds very simple, very easy to do. But again, if it's not put in right, you can have lots of large consequences that happen from that, right? You either pinch the channel down too much, so sediment accumulates on it very quickly, and now your channel's narrow. So your energy now is getting down into the channel, and we start seeing scour again, That's an extreme case for a brush mat because, you know, they're typically going to blow out before it gets to that kind of pressure. But, you know, if you put them in really well,
then,
you know,
they're not going to move.
Yeah. But again, you want to make sure you adjust your width. Because if you come in and build a brush mat, for instance, like that, and you build it too narrow, you've just wasted your time.
Yeah.
You're not collecting the volume of sediment that you really want to collect. Or you build it too big and it gets blown apart. Well, you didn't really need to build it that wide.
And I think I heard you talk earlier that we have to sort of plan for bigger weather events, that this is kind of the world that we're...
Intensity that the thing is now, like, I still think for me, and this is again my own personal feeling, that, you know, we still have the same volume of rain we're going to get.
Yep.
It just maybe we're getting that rain in one storm as opposed to 2 or 3 storms. And we may get one big storm today, and tomorrow we might get another storm the same size again, and then we may not have another storm for a few weeks, right? Yep. So our intensity, to me, is what's changing. And with that intensity, we have quicker events. You know, our rivers can't adapt as fast now because obviously we have agriculture here, we have forestry in New Brunswick that's changed the landscape dramatically, so that uptake of water's gone, you know, between the vegetation being removed. So you sort of want to think about, you know, the standard is we build for 100 years when we're building pipes or culverts or bridges, but in that 100-year, you know, 1% of the year you're going to have a chance of having 100-year, you know, 1% of a year you're going to have a chance of having it, but maybe now you might have 3 or 4% chance of having that. And then you might not you might have them right in a row, and you might have another one for the rest of the year, right? Yeah. So when you look at your structures, you want to sort of look at, you know, we've seen what's happened here with a big rain event. Okay, we've seen the erosion that has happened. So do we change our anchoring approach? Do we nail it down harder? Do we tie it back in? Do we cable it somewhere a little bit better? Or, you know, if we put something here, are we actually going to allow that water to start wanting to come in behind us to start chewing this off? Because we've seen how much it can move out here at some point in time. It's moved a fair amount in very quick time. So we put a structure in. Are we altering that flow enough that if we don't key it in, you know, maybe we leave a gap between the log and the bank, you go maybe like that, and you're thinking, that's not going to hurt anything. And it probably wouldn't in the right flows, but you get 2 or 3 intense flows right away, and that gap all of a sudden becomes something you can't step across anymore, and now your structure's getting outwashed. So keying back into the banks a long ways is very critical to that. And that's where, when we talk about the intensity and the volume of rain, and being very mindful of how you're putting your structure in is critical. Yeah, it's typical of a estuary kind of a flow. You know, you have your flow coming in, your flow going out. Definitely being heavily influenced by the, if you can get the gravel off this bridge here and the boulders and stuff they put in for protect the abutments of the bridge. They've narrowed the channel down significantly. I think even when we look above, what we're going to see above the bridge compared to what we're seeing on the downstream side here, it's created this nice, oh, you have a really nice pool. There's no question. Your scoured out, this is a typical feature you'll see when you have this situation, nice scoured out pool. As far as any restoration, there would probably be nothing I would attempt to do here. Again, you're fighting with the tides coming in, so you have sediment input coming in, you have your sediment load coming down. And again, it's really, this whole system here is going to be dictated just by the velocity of water coming out of this area right here. So again, great pool. As Elliot had referred to, I was not sure why there's no fish holding up in it. I couldn't tell you that. It could be a water quality issue maybe or something like that. But, you know, that's a whole nother investigation right there. So is the headwaters of this a lot of the agriculture area? Or is it more forest or?
Kind of a mixture. Like right now there's a couple areas where like clear cut.
Okay.
And there is like, usually this system here will turn kind of a dark brown, but on the Montague system it turns chocolate brown.
Okay.
Like that.
Right.
Deep, rich.
Mm-hmm.
The water is really not like this avian.
Yeah. Yeah. Outflanking it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It really went to town out here.
Mm-hmm.
See that Gabion starting to collapse.
Yeah.